If there's one saying they've run into the ground, it's the one about time being a great healer. But what people sometimes forget is its role as a destroyer, the kind that spares nothing, not even the sturdiest of monuments or the prettiest of places. Speaking of, in today's video, we're taking you on a tour of some of these locations. Let's find out how they were spoiled over the course of time, for one reason or another. First up, the Great Wall of China. We don't know about you, but we think there's something awfully ironic about a wall built to keep people out, falling into ruin from human behavior. Yes, in case you didn't know, the Great Wall was built with the militaristic intention to keep invading nomadic tribes at bay. Originally, this site was 13,000 miles in length, with at least 25,000 watchtowers at variable distances. Nonetheless, and if certain sources are to go by, today about 60% of it is in various degrees of disrepair. Now, although this might have something to do with the wall being built in the 5th century BC, it doesn't erase the fact that recent human activities like vandalism and outright thievery had a huge role to play in its destruction as well. Yes, you heard that right. People have been stealing stones from the wall for their own use. They're even putting them on the black market. However, besides these insane human destructive behaviors, the wall is also on the brink of collapse due to outgrown plants and exposure to the elements. If you're wondering, yes, the Chinese government is doing everything in its power to tackle each one of these problems. For human causes, for instance, they've imposed heavy fines of up to 5,000 yuan, that's $750 give or take. As for environmental problems like rain, the only option they have is coating it with waterproofing materials. Next, we have Santorini, Greece. You'd think that a place formed of a volcanic eruption would be able to withstand anything, but it turns out all it takes to ruin it is tourists. Not a handful of them. No sir. Around 2 million of them each year. If you haven't guessed yet, we're referring to Santorini in Greece, a destination that's jam-packed with people 24/7, 365 days a year. If you're not the type to frequent travel websites, it's famed for a lot of things, be it its active volcano and blue-domed churches, or its vineyards and cruises. You name it, Santorini's got it, and that's precisely where the problem lies. From what we've gathered, increased tourism has led to uncontrolled construction. What's wrong with a little added accommodation, you ask? Well, if it comes at the cost of destroying age-old geological formations, then absolutely everything. And that's not all. Over-tourism has also influenced wine production in the area. Simply put, the grape prices have gone up to a huge extent. This is mainly due to vineyard owners converting their lands into resorts or selling them to corporations. If you thought this was the end of the location's problems, think again. According to sources, about 30 years ago, the place was made up of a group of villages. However, with construction on the rise, a number of Santorini's villages have completely disappeared. Plain and simple, it's turning into a city. Now, we all know what that implies. Nothing good. Trust us. This place already has traffic problems, for God's sake. All of these issues bring us to the same question from before. What's the government doing about it? As far as we know, they're trying to impose a tourist tax. Sadly, however, it's still being debated. Let's hope it's not too little too late. Moving on now to Angkor Wat, Cambodia. When you think about climate change, we bet that ancient cities are the furthest things from your minds. But we're about to change that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the world's largest religious monument as an example of what it's capable of. We're talking about none other than Angkor Wat, aka the Temple City in Cambodia. Built in the first half of the 12th century, the place was plunged into destruction due to heavy monsoons after a prolonged drought. In the 15th century, that is. The deterioration occurred within a short time of its construction, you see. Put two and two together, if that's what unprecedented weather was able to do back then, just imagine its consequences now. But before you spread this news like wildfire in the name of climate activism, hear us out. The ancient city was also spoiled due to the civil war that ravaged Cambodia in the 1970s. Researchers claim that the Khmer Rouge regime used its walls for target practice, and if that wasn't barbaric enough, they also decapitated a number of Buddha statues housed within its walls. If you think this would make for an excellent anti-war tidbit on top of being a slap in the face of climate change deniers, hold on, it wasn't the final nail in the coffin. The final nail, dear viewers, is present-day tourism. Historians, as well as the local bodies, believe that the city's ancient foundations can't bear the onslaught of tourists that it receives each year. Like, come on, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. Even a house from the 18th century would cave in under the pressure of around 3,000 people. Okay, we know what you're thinking. It's about the preservatory measures, isn't it? Well, let's just say that they're not selling the tickets for cheap anymore. The entry fees alone are between $37 and $100 now. Up next is the Colosseum, Italy. Of all the places on today's lineup, the Colosseum is perhaps the only one that needs no introduction. But for those of you who failed history class, fret not. It's basically a theater from the days of old. That's the simplest way we can put it. As for its use, well, it was the scene of quite a lot of horrifying horrifying things. By horrifying, we mean gladiators involved in hand-to-hand combat or wrestling animals like lions. Where's PETA when you need it? All jokes aside, some sources also claim that it was where a number of early Christians were put to death. Anywho, let's not get carried away here. Our concern is what destroyed this building, a building that was once so great that it could easily house 50,000 spectators. To begin with, we have a series of earthquakes from the 5th century AD to blame for its collapse, especially its outer south side. Apart from that, fires sparked by lightning had a hand in its deterioration. Then, of course, the usual suspects, aka the elements, also played their part. Oh, and did we mention that stone robbers were also involved in bringing about its disrepair? Yes, like what is it with people and robbing spoils from famous buildings? Beats us. Finally, and unlike some of the previous picks, the Colosseum has been restored a great deal in the 20th century. Even when it was in disrepair, its stones were being used to construct hospitals and churches in Rome. Do you see where we're going with this? Let's just say that there's a metaphor about the beauty and destruction and religious revenge in there somewhere. Now, we have the Temple of Bel at Palmyra, Syria. Speaking of religions and revenge, if you've ever read the Hebrew Bible, you might know a certain someone by the name of Baal. The location that we're about to discuss was one of his major temples. To make a long story short, he was the supreme god of the Canaanites, a people that lived in the ancient Near East. Besides being a temple, it also served as a trade center between Europe and Asia. Simply, and if we were to borrow from a famous source's words, it was the world's most culturally significant place. Now, when you put it like that, it makes you think that people would give anything to preserve it. Well, not really, or not all people. Believe it or not, a bunch of ISIS fighters destroyed this 2,000-year-old monument back in 2015. It was when they took control of Palmyra. In case you're wondering why they would do it, let's quote Stuart Manning, who chairs the Cornell University's Department of Classics. According to him, it was their way of curbing diversity and implementing narrow uniformity. We 100% agree to that. Imagine being so afraid of someone else's knowledge that you have to blow up their cultural sites. Oh, and it's not the first time that Islamic militants have done something like this. Come take a look at what they did to our final pick. And finally, we have the Buddhas of Bamiyan, Afghanistan. Afghanistan is sometimes described as the grave of empires, meaning that a number of different powers have reigned over and lost control of the land. At one point in time, that is, in the 4th and 5th centuries, it was the commercial hub for the Chinese Buddhists. It was during this time that the famous Buddhas of the Bamiyan Valley were built. Some sources say that the original 53 and 40-meter figures of the Buddhas were covered in gold and adorned with jewels. Now, we're not sure how accurate the source is, but one thing that we're sure of is that these statues were one of Afghanistan's best-known archaeological sites. Yes, we said were, because after the Taliban takeover of 2001, they were destroyed. We wish we were making this up, as possible vessels to idolatry. Dude, they had stood there for close to 1,500 years. Good God, talk about insecurities. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think any of these places can be fitfully restored? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.